Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our latest webcast on exploring the voice of the customer. As with all of these things, we need to do a little bit of admin before we start. So my name's John Wellwood, and I'm going to take you through the subject for the next 30 minutes. We'll get to the end of the 30 minutes, and if it's anything like we've had before, we got lots and lots of questions. So we'll try and answer as many as we can, typically about 10 to 15. Any that we don't answer in that period, then we'll make sure that we tweet an answer to you at the end and everyone can see those answers and share. So if you've got some questions as we go along, please type them in the chat box and I'll answer them when we get to the end. We'll share this video on our website when we're finished so you can relive it again or share it with friends and colleagues. And if you'd like to tweet about it or contact us on social media afterwards, then please do so. The subject today, as I said, was voice of the customer, and I think voice of the customer is probably the most important part of any business improvement activity. If you don't understand what's important from your customer's perspective, then we can't design things for them, we can't provide the service they require, and we end up giving them poor quality service, poor products, and ultimately we don't have any customers. So it's absolutely paramount important that we understand the voice of a customer in any business. Typically, we've got three different types of customers. We've got our normal end customer or user, the one we typically think about when we say the word customer. We've got regulatory type customers. These are the kind of people who are authorities, people who make us do things because we have to do these things to be in business. So it might be the FSA, it might be some regulatory body. And then the last group of customers we have, which are the ones we're going to talk about primarily today, are internal customers. So internal customers are people that we provide a product, a service, some information to, etc. When we give them those things, they're our internal customers. So normally we talk about external customers quite a lot, but today we want to focus a little bit more on the internal customers. If we get the understanding of the voice of the customer right, what can the benefits be? How can it help our business? Well, the key thing that it starts us to help us do, let me jump one there. The key thing that it helps us do is it starts us to help us to understand exactly what our customers require. So I've got a little video and hopefully it's going to work. We get this quite a lot where we think we know what our customers are going to require, but actually we guess or we interpret or we think they know what they're going to do. So like that one, that example there, the guy thinks he needs some help pushing his car over the edge, but of course that's not what he's after. That's all, he just jumps to the need. So when we look at what our customers want, the first thing that the voice of the customer does is it gives us an understanding of what they really want. And if we understand that, we can obviously give them what they require. The other thing about understanding voice of the customer is if we don't give them what they want, then they're just going to leave. They're going to disappear. They're going to do something different. They're going to go one to one of our competitors. In some recent survey, they discovered why did customers leave, and it's quite interesting that you see the real reason most customers leave us is indifferent personal service. If we don't give the customer what they want and understand that voice of the customer, that's when they leave. In fact, we had a great example in our office this morning with Vodafone, who had given us all kinds of problems as they normally do. We asked them to give us a ring back. They didn't ring us back. Eventually, we said we've had enough and we're going to leave them. And the reason we're leaving them is indifferent personal service. It's not because we don't like the product. The price is comparable with anybody else, but it's really the level of service that's let us down, and therefore people leave. It's also interesting when we look at a voice of the customer sort of exercise. When we talk to companies and we say, rate your service, how well do you think you do? Most of us think we're doing a fantastic job. However, when you then go and talk to the same customers and really ask them what they discover, you discover that's not often the case. So we need to make sure we're not complacent about customer service. We really understand what's important to our customers. If we don't, we end up in all kinds of problems. So here's a great example. B&Q did some fantastic marketing, they would say. They've got their brand all over Ellen MacArthur when she went round the world in her single-handed yacht race to try and do those kind of things. But here's what one of their customers had to say. They thought, you've travelled all this way around the world, you've done it in 70 odd days, you've done fantastic. Why can't you help me deliver my kitchen, which is just down the road? So if we don't get that right, we're in all kinds of problems. We have to understand what's important to our customer. If we can, we'll sell more, we'll get improved customer service, we'll get better staff satisfaction because people won't be dealing with all these issues every day. We'll get better organization, our design will be better, our customer focus will be better, and we'll really take things from a customer perspective all the way to our business. We need to try and think, however, not about the external customer. We need to try and think about the internal customer as well. We've all got internal customers, each and every one of us. If we produce something, we fill a form in, we move something from position A in a company to position B in a company. If we do anything with the customer company, we typically hand it over to somebody else. And that person we're handing it over to, we would classify as your internal customer. And if we can really understand what's important to our internal customer, we can give them what they want. If we don't, then we just get frustration. So we get a situation where people are going, they've not done what they said they were going to do when they were going to do it. We get people getting really agitated because you do the same thing time after time after time, getting it wrong and doing it wrong every single time. So you end up pulling your hair out and screaming at your computer. It could be that it happens so often, eventually you get so hacked off with the person who's given you the information or the product that it's more or less trying to make you cry. You've just had enough of what you're doing, and morale suffers within the business. The result of that, of course, is performance starts to shrink. We no longer get what we want, when we want, how we want it, so it takes us longer to do things, our quality goes down, and ultimately that has an effect on our results. A great example of an internal customer for me was we were working with a big company in the States, and that company in the States had a supplier down in Brazil. They made rail carriages. And the company in the States took the raw rail carriage from the Brazilian company, and then it finished it off up in New York State. When we got into trying to find out one of their problems, what we discovered was that the United States company thought the Brazilian company was rubbish, because every time the product came up, it never had all the parts that were meant to be on it attached to that particular rail carriage. So we did some investigation, we'd done some voice to customer, we did some analysis. What we discovered was it was a very simple problem. When they'd done the contract between the States and Brazil, they'd obviously translated it into Portuguese. They had the word, the product should contain the following items. But when they translated it into Portuguese, that had changed ever so slightly. So that word should was interpreted as if you can, if you've got time. So the Brazilians thought they were doing a fantastic job because they were sending things up on time, in their opinion, in full. But the Americans thought, these are never correct. There was a complete misconception, a misunderstanding between the two companies, and it's because of a misunderstanding between internal customers. So if we get these things wrong, it can have catastrophic effects. In this instance, the two sister companies in the same group were at war, trying to blame each other for who was doing things right and who was doing things wrong. In reality, they were both at fault, but they hadn't actually looked at things from an internal customer perspective. If we get these things right, if we understand the voice of our internal customer, then we don't make mistakes. We don't have to redo other people's work. So when something gets handed to you, you don't have to do it again. When you get something, you don't have to put in quite as much effort because you don't kind of have to redo the wheel, reinvent it, do things again. You do things quicker because you don't have to check it. You know it's there. You know it's always there, and therefore things flow through the company in a quicker manner. It's also a case that if we don't do that, we're going to increase our costs, our lead time takes longer, and ultimately our quality will be a major factor because we won't be giving the end customer what they require. And the real problem from an internal customer perspective is we have a really poor morale. We get people getting frustrated, we get people resentful. And typically, as internal customers, we only know that something's wrong when we get people getting really angry. So what we need to try and do is take that away and make it work nice and smoothly. To do that, what we do is we set up a voice of the customer process. So if we're running a business improvement program, the first thing that we would do is try and identify who those particular customers are and what we need to know about them. We then need to work out how can we collect some information from that customer so that we can understand what's important to them. And if there is gaps, we can do something about it then. Once we've got that data, we need to analyze it to find out what the customer is really asking for, and we can translate that into something we call CTQs, critical to quality. These are the things that if we get those right, our customer will be delighted. We can then set up some measurements so we know whether that customer is getting what they want, or if they're not, we can identify that quickly and do something about it. In order to explain this a little bit better, I thought we'd do a little exercise. So I kind of looked at myself and we thought, who's my customer? What's important to my internal customers? What can we do it? And we ran a little exercise which might be of interest to you. So the first thing I did was identify who my staff were or who my customers were. In this case, it's all my staff, it's my shareholders, and obviously it's my external customers. But we wanted to look at just the staff. You know, what was important to the staff? I wanted to know what motivated them. How could I make sure they were happy? How could I make them more efficient? How could I make them more enthusiastic than they already are? So that's what I wanted to identify from them. I then went to step 2, and step 2 is all about how could you collect data. Now, obviously, you could collect data in a whole series of different ways. You can collect surveys, you can go and talk to them, you could do staff appraisals, etc., etc. But what I decided to do in this instance was we simply asked each person in the team anonymously to tell us what they thought. What's important to them about my role? What can they tell me as my internal customer? What's important to them to help them with their jobs, help them deliver good performance? So we sent that out. We got all kinds of information back from them. But before we did that, I thought, what would I think that they were going to say? So I wrote down what I thought they would say, and I've listed it here. So I thought they'd want me to make sure that they were motivated and enthusiasm, give them confidence in the business, give them data. So we then collected the data, as we said, and tried to see if there was any comparison between the two. So it was quite interesting. We got lots and lots of comments from every single member of staff saying what was important to them. They gave us it in their own language and the way that they wanted to try and do it. And that's what we typically get when we do a voice of the customer exercise. We hear what's important to the customer in the language that they use. And every single person will say it in a different way or show it in a different way. So what we need to try and do in step 3 is we need to analyze that data and try and summarize it. So typically what we do is we take all those verbatims, in this case the things that people said, and we kind of group them together to try and get some understanding of the common themes that were coming out. So when I did this for our particular exercise, these are the kind of things we discovered. People wanted to make sure that they saw me as the face of the company to external stakeholders. They wanted to ensure that they were happy and motivated. They wanted to make sure that they were given some confidence that the company was secure and that things were looking good. They wanted us to be seen as being professional. They wanted to make sure that if I was around, I was available to be contacted quickly so they could have discussions with me, etc. So these were the things that were important to everybody in the team. We then looked at what did I think, what did they think, and we've seen, what was different, what had I missed, what was I misunderstood. And this is again a list of what came up. And it's quite interesting that there were things that I had not really appreciated that were important to my internal customers. And so things like me giving people time was very important to them. Me making sure that I was open to new ideas, me making sure that I gave them the tools for the job. These were things that were all important, which I had never even thought about putting into my particular list. So we can see that there were some things missing, and obviously we can then do something about them. So we can kind of motivate people, we can give them the tools for the job, we can give them good in the business. We can make sure we give them the right training. We can make sure that we can get internal communications correctly. We can get an accurate position of what's going on. What we then can do is take those CTQs, the things that were really important to our customers, and then we can turn them into the KPIs. So all that list of things that we had from the analysis, we turned into what we say are CTQs, critical quality. Right, and there's a whole list of them here. I'm not going to go through them all. When you get this, you download, you can read them at your leisure. But it's things like, things that were important. Run appraisals at least quarterly. So we're going to do that. And our KPI is appraisals have got to be conducted within 10 days of the quarter end. So I now have a way of measuring what's important to my internal customers. And we did that for each one of the areas that the people had shown concern about and things that need to be done. So lots of the things, as you'll see, are about annual appraisals. It's about timing of information. It's about giving people what they want when they want it. And if we can make sure we do that, suddenly we now know what's important to our customers. We can translate it into something that's meaningful to business in terms of CTQs, and then we can put a measure of performance in. How well are we doing against that particular thing to try and make it happen? So as you can see, there's about 3 pages of things that we came up with. So moving forward, what have we done as a result of that? We've put monthly updates in place. We've changed the way we're communicating. We've changed how we set up our appraisal systems. We've changed our communication to give people quicker, easier, faster communication so they know what's happening. We're giving them more information about the company to try and make that happen. And I'm making myself more available to everyone as and when required. And because we've now got those KPIs in place, I can actually see whether I'm actually doing a good job for my internal customers. And the resultant has been, obviously, that we've followed the internal process and we're now getting sort of people that are happier, we're getting better motivation, etc. So it doesn't matter who your internal customers are, whether you're the MD of a company or whether you're someone who's working in a process within a company, you can do something about it. You can understand who your customers are, what data you need to collect, analyze that data, translate it into something that's meaningful for you, and then you can set the specifications so you know how well you're doing. Here's another example from a client that we've been working with. They wanted to try and make sure that their billing process was accurate. So the way they'd categorized it is the need was that they had an accurate billing process. The driver for that was to make sure that they had an accurate billing instruction telling them what to do and an accurate billing production. They were the two things that went into that need. The requirement, therefore, was to make sure they got good time recording for this particular client. They needed to get good MI, management information, etc. And they were the CTQs, the requirements of the CTQs. And then they put 2 measures of performance in place. Defect units and opportunities of the billing instruction, how many problems did they have, and that made them able to measure that particular thing. So suddenly they know what's important, they work on the things that need to be important, and they can measure what's happening. And you can do this for any internal customer. But it doesn't quite stop there. Most companies, when they do voice of the customer, that's kind of where they stop. For me, there's another thing we should look at. Because the CTQs only really give you the perspective from the customer. And it's quite interesting. There's a guy called Kano who developed something called the Kano model, which was all about looking to try and understand things from a customer viewpoint. And typically he came up with 3 ways to describe the needs of a customer. There are things called satisfiers, which are the things down the middle of this particular diagram. And these are the things that typically, if you ask your customer about why they bought a product or service or what was important to them, they're the things that they would tell you. They're the things like, I want it on time, I want it in full, I want it in orange, I want it in this particular shape, whatever it happens to be. These are the things they would tell you. So from our internal customer's perspective, they're the things they would tell you. From our external customer perspective, these are the things that they would make the buying decision based on. So price, performance, the color range available, whatever it happens to be. But there are 2 things that are kind of missing when we do a voice of the customer from a Kano model perspective. The first one is dissatisfiers. So Kano came up with things that were dissatisfiers. These were things that if they weren't present in your product or your service or your process, then the customer would be absolutely dissatisfied with what you were doing. But they were so basic and so just assumed that they would be there that they wouldn't even voice them. So when we did our voice the customer, they wouldn't mention these things. The other end of the scale is things that would delight our customers. And that's what happens when we have things which blow the customer away. They didn't even think about these particular things. And because they couldn't think of them, when we do our VOC exercise, they couldn't possibly have brought them up. So what we need to try and do now is, once we've finished our voice the customer exercise, we need to think about what are the dissatisfiers that we need to make sure are in place, and we need to add them to our CTQs. And then we need to look at what are the delighters for our customers, if there are any, and add them in as CTQs as well. And the delighters are the things that will particularly give us our steal on the market, make us look great internally when people get things done, because there'll be things like, well, they did what I asked, but they also did this. So it makes that customer service so much better. So we need to try and make sure we really use the voice of the customer correctly, run through those 5 steps that we talked about, and then add that Kano model, particularly at the end, so we understand what the dissatisfiers are and what those delighters are. And if we can do that, we have a transformational opportunity within our business. We understand what's important to people. We understand why we get the frustration, why we have all the costs associated with our hidden factories in our business. We'll understand why people get frustrated, why morale might not be as good as it can be. And then we can turn it around and we can make things so much better for the business. Now, not everybody uses voice of the customer in their business. There's a fair number of reasons on this slide why they don't. Most of it's the case of they either aren't aware of the concept of voice of the customer, or they perceive they don't have the time or see that it's important, so they never go around doing it. They may do it for external customers, but they rarely do it for internal customers. It could be in some instances that they're too scared to actually go and find out what the reality will be. So you don't want to go and talk to your internal customer in case they tell you that you're doing a terrible job, you're never providing it on time, you're never giving a good quality service. So they don't want people to start thinking along those kind of lines. They don't understand that 5-step process that we don't went through, so they don't know how to do it. It could be they're measuring the wrong things and they just haven't got it set up in their business so they can do anything about it. So what we need to try and do is we need to try and get more people engaged in doing voice of the customer. We need to get more people happy with it, using it, making it happen. So for me, the best way to try and do that is to get some examples from your own company. Go and find an internal process or perhaps an external process and work out who are the customers, and walk through that 5-step process so that you can come up with a lovely example that you can prove internally that this will work. Typically, you can do this as a really quick exercise because most of you will actually have internal customers. So why not go and do it for your internal customers now? And therefore, you can start using that as an example internally. Therefore, you're leading by example. You're showing them what can do. And that surely starts to spread because your internal customers will start going, I'm getting a fantastic service now. And then they'll do it to their customers. And hopefully that will spread all the way through the organization. If you can look at your KPIs, your key performance measures, and make sure that they're in line with what's important to your customers, again, that will have an impact and people will start engaging to try and do those kind of things. You should also try, every time you do a project from now on, make sure you start with a voice of the customer exercise. Walk through those 5 steps. Even if you only just did the first one to identify who your customers are, that's a good starting point, if nothing else. So it doesn't matter what we're working on, think about it from a voice of the customer perspective. It doesn't matter if it's a tiny little project or a massive big one, just work on voice of the customer to try and make these things better. So we've gone through and we've explained a little bit about voice of the customer today. It's a slightly bigger subject than we've got time to go through, and it's always good to work on real examples. But I think voice of the customer is vital in any business, and regardless of size, regardless of what you do. I think it's a very simple process to follow, although sometimes collecting the data can be difficult. I think we've all got internal process and customers and processes, so we should all be working on this regardless of where we work. And the secret for me is getting people engaged with voice of the customer. And the better we can do that, the more we'll get people involved and we can get people using the terminology and starting making things better from their customer's perspective. So that's what I was going to talk to you about today. If you go on our blog or sign up for our newsletter, we do these things regularly, and you can get some more information. If you've got any other questions, we'll take them in a second. But after we're finished, if you want to contact us and talk to us about more, please do. We'd love to hear about your experiences of Voice the Customer. Maybe you've gone away and tried to use this. We'd love to hear how you get on to try and make that happen. So in that case, that's what I was going to say. So let's see if we've got any questions, any queries or questions from what we've said today. So let's have a little look and see what we've got. So we've got a question about how long should it take to do this particular thing. Well, typically I think it's quite a simple process to do. So you can do it in a few hours if you've got some understanding. That example that we did from the my perspective, it took literally 2 or 3 hours. I prepared things, asked people to fill things in, and we did the analysis. So therefore, we can do things fairly quickly. So it's not that big a question to try and do it. So everybody should have time in their day to try and engage and make that happen, to try and do it. What else have we got? Let's see if we've got any other questions going through. You decide that a customer is valid, relevant to your customer. How do you assume that it is? So if we're trying to look and find out what's important to our customers, a good question, because we have different types of customers. Some customers are more important than other customers. It's unfortunately the reality of things. So we need to try and do some segmentation. So typically I would do that segmentation after stage 1. Who are my customers? What do I want to know from them? I would then segment them to try and understand which ones I should be working on, to try and work out who's the best people to work on in terms of the time frame. And once you've segmented them, you then need to go away and try and find the data to try and do those kind of things. So I think segmenting your customers is really important right at the beginning. I got another question. What do you do if you can't get any data from your customers? Well, I think this is quite a pertinent question, because sometimes you think you've got lots of lovely data on your customers because you do lovely surveys and you collect feedback and things like that. The unfortunate thing is when you actually analyze that data, you discover that data is not very robust. It's not been asked in the right way. It's not neutral. It's not unbiased. So what you need to try and do is you need to make sure that you set up a good data collection plan and collect it in the correct way. If you still can't get enough data, then you might have to just do best guesses, which is by no means the best thing to do, but it might be you just have to put yourself in your customer's shoes. So it might be you can't actually go and talk to your customers, but if you know enough about your customers, you can work out what's important to them and try and work from that respect, if that's the only thing you can do going forward. What else do we have? How often should we undertake a Voice the Customer exercise? I think we should undertake them fairly regularly. So even if you did this for your internal customers and you've got your KPIs, I would say maybe every 6 months, just have a quick review, check where we're at, make sure that you are doing it in a logical way and you've not slipped back into old habits. But most companies, to be honest, what they have to do is, if you just do it once, that's brilliant because that's never been done before. And you've got so many other internal and external customers, you probably need to work on them as well. So most companies actually don't get round to redoing Voice the Customer, but I think every 6 months would be really good to try and make that happen. What else we got there? Sorry, I just saw them. Excuse me. How would you convince people, especially to use Voice the Customer? I think the key thing here is to show them that it works. So if it's an internal customer, go and talk to them, prove that it works. Whatever they say, try and provide it with them. If you can't, then you need to explain why. So sometimes just opening the channels of communication is a good thing. So perhaps that's what we're going to try and do. We're going to just try and start the conversation. That would be how I would start to try and make that happen, to try and do those kind of things. What else? Someone's just asked whether they can have a copy of the slides. Yes, absolutely. We can have a copy of the slides. We'll make sure you go to the website when we're finished and you can download it to try and make that happen. How often do customers not know what they need? I think that's back to these delighters, dissatisfiers, and satisfiers. I think most customers really do know what they want. If you'd ask them the right question in the right way. Typically, they don't ask the right questions. We don't ask the right questions. We don't ask them in the right way, and the result is we can't provide it. So I think if you think your customers don't know what they, or you don't know what they need, then it's probably because we're not asking the customers the right questions in the right way to try and do that kind of thing. Okay, we're at 1:30, so I'm going to stop there. I apologise if I've not got any of your questions, but as I said, if I haven't answered them, we'll make sure that we tweet you an answer in the next half an hour or so. And within the next half an hour, the presentation and the webcast will be available for you to download, and you can have a look at the slides. So thank you very much for your participation, and we'll see you next time we have a webcast. Thank you. Bye-bye.